No matter what, people will commit to misunderstanding you. What's most important is your commitment to understanding yourself. Hello, you guys. My name is Nkirka Madani, known as NK, and welcome back to Misunderstood. This is your ultimate guide to solo travel. As a girl who has done 12 solo trips. I actually just got back from my 12th solo trip, which is what inspired this episode. Right now, we are in the thick of summer, but even outside of summer, I have talked to you guys extensively about solo travel. Traveling is so good for the soul. It expands your brain and it allows you to really live out your dreams. It allows you to get new perspective. And I am all about that, of course, here on Misunderstood. That's really how I live my life. So this episode, I really wanted to, of course, recap the trip I went on, but tie it into how I believe anybody, literally anyone listening to this who has never been on a solo trip, you can take a solo trip. It is daunting. It is a little overwhelming. Of course, we're not discounting those feelings, but I love solo travel. And I will continue to do it forever because it really helps me feel so connected to myself. And that is, of course, what I want for you as well. But before we get into today's episode, take some time right now to rate this show, Misunderstood, 5 stars. The podcast is growing. The viewership is growing, which makes me so proud. And I just love hearing all the feedback from the podcast. If you have not already, please take some time to do the very free and easy step of rating the show 5 stars. That really helps so much with the discovery of this podcast so more people can learn about this show. Thank you so much. All right. So like I said, I am fresh off of my 12th solo trip. I went to Toronto for the first time ever. It's funny. A lot of people who learned that I went to Toronto and the people who I met in Toronto did ask me what inspired Toronto. I am very much all about going to places I've never been. I try to prioritize going to places I've never been over places I've been to a lot. And I also really did want to leave the country. And I really wanted to leave the country specifically because I want to see more of the world outside of the US. I live in New York. I'm from Seattle and I spent 10 years in California. And even outside of that, I have been to 25 states in the US. So I always want to, when I can, leave the country. And Toronto's not that far from New York. It was only an hour flight, which was so short. So it's very doable. And just given the climate of my year, this year in 2026, I knew that I couldn't go too far and I couldn't take an extended vacation. So I really wanted to try out Toronto. That is actually also a photo on my vision board for 2026. So I'm very happy that I got to cross off that destination this year. We will talk more about the Toronto trip later on in this video, but I just wanted to set the scene. Also, I do have a few other podcast episodes about traveling because, as I mentioned, traveling is a very big pillar in my life. It's very important to me and I try to definitely go on a trip every single year. I have definitely gone on a trip every single year since 2016. It's been a long span of time of committing to traveling in general, but then also traveling in a solo capacity. But I want to reference 2 episodes that I already have up on Misunderstood. Episode 25, which is Your Writing Solo. This is the intro course I created essentially to traveling solo specifically, and I talk about a lot of very granular tips there. The other episode I have about traveling in general is episode 36, which is things you do and don't do while abroad, which goes over my interesting travel story to Ireland, but also just tips about solo traveling and traveling in general while you're abroad, meaning outside of the country. So definitely go listen to those episodes if you haven't already. I would say listen to those before this one. This episode specifically, I really wanted to give I would say high level overview on tips I keep in mind every single time I travel now. Like I said, I've traveled to 12 different places now solo. solo. And these are the big themes that come up every single time I take myself on a trip. Also, I thought it would be fun to read you guys all the places I have traveled first and foremost. So you can keep that in your mind. Just know that these are all places that I have been, would recommend going, and I had a good time in all of these places. And like I said, I was there in a solo capacity. So I know that is also a really big conversation of where should one go solo tripping if you haven't gone before. When we think of safety and comfortability, I sign off on all of these places. I did Spain and Portugal in 2019. I did Santa Monica and LA in 2021. I did Miami in 2021. I did San Diego in 2022. I did New York in 2022. This was before I moved here. I did London in 2023, Paris and Germany in 2023, Chicago in 2024, Maine in 2025, Ireland in 2025, Vermont in 2025, and Toronto in 2026. So that is my full list of travels thus far in a solo capacity. Reading off that list just gives me so much happy nostalgia. All those places mean so much to me. I grew within myself every step of the way on all of those trips and have so many great memories of those places. All right, now let us get into my list that I've been referencing. So I have 4 main takeaways from the trips I go on. The overarching feelings I have towards each trip, and what I would honestly tell anybody who is preparing to go on their first solo trip, and even people who have done solo trips. This can apply to anybody who has interests in going on a solo trip or who has aspirations on wanting to go and maybe just needs a little push in the right direction. These are the 4 main items that I keep in mind every single time I solo travel. All right, number 1 is be prepared. So being prepared, I would say, starts with budgeting for wherever you are going. I do get a lot of questions about budgeting for trips. It's really important to note that your budget depends on where you're going. So it really is not a across the board number. It wouldn't even make sense to say one specific number because every place has a different currency and every place has a different cost of living. It wouldn't make sense. And I think anybody could understand that. So what I always like to say is do research on where you're going, what the conversion rate is for where you are. And this really applies to if you're going out of the country, it would be different than the currency you, of course, live in currently. So that is very much specific to going abroad. Even if you're going somewhere within the US, for example, there are a lot of places that cost very differently. New York, the most expensive city in the country. So every other place I've gone in the US, I'm always pleasantly surprised because everywhere is usually ends up being significantly cheaper than New York. But if you're in a different place and say you come to New York, for example, you might not be so happy that it is super expensive here. But that's the thing. You have to do your research on the cost of living wherever you are. That would be number 1. Number 2, I would say some planning and emphasis on some. I used to plan out every single thing I wanted to do. This was when I first started traveling. And I realized that I had the most fun when I almost scrapped my very stringent to-do list and agenda and I just had fun. Of course, you do need some level of planning wherever you are. You need to know the logistics of how far a place that you want to see is to where you're staying and how to get on the transits. You need to know these things, of course, and that is where the some comes in. Some planning, some level of planning you need for every single trip. No matter how type B you are, you do need some planning to get it done. I'm very type A. We've talked about this on podcast episodes in the past. But even as a type A person, I have had to release the reins of being so controlling because being controlling is not going to give you the best experience. It's just not. There are so many ways that I have learned that I need to just live in the moment and have fun, but some level of planning needs to happen. And my best advice for some planning you can do for a future trip is look up the highlights of a city. Because if you're going somewhere for the first time, I fully believe, and one of my principles is you should be leaning into where you're going. You should be seeing the culture and you should have a takeaway of knowing that you actually visited the high points of wherever you are. even if you don't do it all, you should be doing some. So some level of planning would include looking up certain places in the city or state that you're in that are very core to that city or that state, and make sure that you hit those. But you don't have to do everything, just do a few of them. And I believe some planning will get you there. The second very important tip I would give anybody is be cautious. There are a few items I want to talk about. The first and foremost is do not post live, meaning if you're on social media, this really applies to people who have social media. Do not post immediately when you're there. Do not give any indicator that you are by yourself. Even if it is a low likelihood that anything negative will happen, you do not want to give anybody that access. It is just not smart and it is unsafe. I literally did not tell anybody I was going to Toronto except for 2 people who I trust. And I did not post about it on social media until I was already in the airport on the way back to New York. And this is what I do for actually most trips now. I find that I actually have so much more peace because I'm keeping it close to my chest, because at the end of the day, it is your safety and no one needs to know that you're by yourself until you are literally back home safe. And of course, gather your memories and take the photos, take the videos. You don't have to post them. And actually, another thing I really noticed within myself on this specific trip, because this was actually the very first time that I didn't post super immediately. And even on my past trips, I want to be clear, I have never posted where I was staying. I have never posted very intimate details that would indicate where I was or anything like that, because that's not smart. But this trip to Toronto was the first time that I just went dark. I just did not even post at all for the entire duration of my stay. And it gave me so much peace knowing that I was living in my own bubble. Literally, no one knew where I was. And it's so freeing. It's so freeing to just live for yourself and not live for that validation of clicking post. And for what? I'm not trying to hate on it. Truly, I'm not. I'm really just speaking from a safety standpoint. You really don't have to let other people know where you are the moment you are there. You don't. All right. It is for your safety. And on that note, the next point for being cautious is also don't tell strangers that you are by yourself. This actually has happened to me a ton of times on the 12 trips I've been on, but I have found that people at the bar or walking by or just very random people, truly strangers, they would ask, you must have friends here in the city, or are you going by yourself? Things like that, which those probing questions are them trying to gain information. That's the harsh reality. They're trying to gain information on whether you are by yourself or you're with people. So I always say, oh no, my friends are waiting for me, or yep, I'm staying with a friend. You need to be very, 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 very cautious about what you tell people, and definitely don't tell people that you're by yourself. Do not do that. Never, never, never do that. And I'm speaking specifically when you're on these trips. And yes, even if you're solo, which you are, no one needs to know that information. Keep that to yourself and make up a lie. I feel like these are the times where little white lies are okay for your safety. I will stand on that. And the next one for being cautious is take Ubers at night. It could be Uber, taxi, some type of transportation service. Try not to take public transportation at night, especially because you're by yourself. I unfortunately have been in a few scary situations. One happened in Paris and another happened in Spain. So this was a while ago, but I took public transportation at night both times and I had very scary encounters. I was fine in the end, but they were too close of calls for me to ever do that again. I would always urge everyone to take an Uber, share your Uber location also with a friend that you trust, even if it's back home and even if it's somewhere that's not even remotely close to where they are, that's okay. But as long as you know that you're safe, that's truly all that matters. And with Ubers and Lyfts now, I know that they have so many safety precautions in the car. I would personally defer to taking those modes of transportation when you are traveling, just to make sure that you are getting home safe. No public transportation, no walking home. Try to avoid that, please. Also, I had to do this actually in Toronto. I had the Uber driver wait at the front of where I was staying before he drove away, just so I fully got into the Airbnb. These are precautions. Again, it is for your safety, and that is something that you should never take lightly. All right, the third tip I would give to anybody is be curious, especially when you're in a brand new place. You get to explore, and that's the beauty of taking a solo trip. You aren't following anybody else's schedule. You are only following your own. And there's so much curiosity when you let yourself roam and you let yourself just relax and lean into where you are. I love taking routes that weren't set out for me. I love just going off the beaten path and finding things that I didn't know existed. This has happened literally in every single trip I have ever taken. I see a cool road and I'm just really inspired to walk it. I find a hole in the wall place that I end up going into and loving and meeting the staff and having a really beautiful experience that I get to cherish. That's just an example, but there are so many ways that being curious, especially while you're on a solo trip, will play in your favor every single time. And the fourth tip I would give anybody traveling solo is be brave. Being brave is something I love to say all the time because I myself was once not brave and was very scared of trying new things and getting outside of my own comfort zone. It has taken me a very long time to be brave, but as someone who has grown into herself and has grown into being brave, I urge and encourage everyone to be brave. Be brave while you are traveling solo. Be brave to go sit at a bar, watch a game, or just sit and read outside in public, or sit and have dinner alone. You will find that you grow within yourself with every single seemingly hard experience you do. You get another notch of confidence under your belt, and you will see in real time that you are able to do it, you have conquered it, and then it will give you the courage to do it again. I truly love being brave. I love that feeling of that inner strength you get every single time you do something that's a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit hard. And being brave will lead to really, really beautiful interactions. I have always met at least one person on every single solo trip I've ever been on. I have met at least one person who has given me their contact information, and we've stayed in touch on social media. Every single time. Even this last time when I was in Toronto, I went to a bar the first night I was there and the FIFA games were on, and I usually sit at the bar. That is my go-to as well because everyone at the bar is pretty social. So I went and sat at the bar. I also brought my book because I wanted to read. That was my intention. But I sat at the bar and there was this woman to my left and she said hi to me. Then she offered me to sit down. She was also with her guy friend. They both welcomed me in with open arms. Her name was Carly. Shout out to Carly. We ended up talking for 2.5 hours. She bought my glass of wine. We had such a fun, fruitful night. And she was just so sweet and so accommodating. And moments like that, I will never forget. But it's because I was brave enough to go sit at a bar by myself. I was also in essentially an evening dress, and this is a dive bar. I just wanted to interject that little story because those are the moments where you being brave and leaning into newness will get you such fun stories and these tokens of memories that I'm just so happy that I have. I have a whole Rolodex of amazing memories from solo trips, but it's really because I decided to be brave. And that's all that I want for anybody who is on the cusp and on the brink of also doing a solo trip as well. So those are my 4 top tips. Like I said, these are really, I would say, additional tips to those other 2 episodes that I have. I would first definitely recommend listening to episode 25. That one is the most granular in terms of the tips, but I think these 4 additional tips are true evergreen items that I would say for any trip. this will really help you feel very secure. And I know that your trip will go well. I can actually promise you that if you're so open and so willing to lean into the adventure, you will get the adventure that you're seeking for. All right. And now let us talk about the Toronto recap. Like I said, I went to Toronto for the very first time and it was so much fun. Also, before I get into where I went, what I did, all of it, I did vlog the entire trip. So by the time that you hear this episode, the vlog's already going to be up on YouTube. So I will link it down below in the description of this podcast episode, and go subscribe to my YouTube channel so you see all my travels, because I actually do pretty much vlog every single trip I go on. I think it's a fun visual aid to these podcast episodes. All right. I wrote down every single thing I did because I knew that I was going to tell the story on the podcast. So let me find that. Toronto, if you guys don't know, I didn't know this until I started researching about what I wanted to do before I got there, but I learned that Toronto is such a big food hub. It's a food mecca. I really, really wanted to do essentially a food tour, which I ended up doing in the 3 days I was there. I was there for essentially 3 whole days. I got there Tuesday morning and I left Thursday night. So I had pretty much 3 full days in Toronto to play and to enjoy. I want to say, before I even get started on the story, is I went into the trip knowing that I really wanted to step away from reality of New York and the busyness. And I have also been feeling very burnt out. I believe I mentioned this a few podcast episodes back, but life has been very crazy. PT for my knee has been a big undertaking, and I have just been really tired, and I knew that I really needed an escape. I needed a break from everything, from work, from working out, from life. I needed to go away. So I'm happy that I planned this trip. Planning purposes, for anybody curious, I did plan it a month in advance. So I bought my flight a month before the trip, also booked my Airbnb a month prior. Also, in terms of Airbnb and hotel, I find myself using both. I have used Airbnb for 10 plus years now. Also, I do like hotels, but I just feel like Airbnbs are a lot more flexible, especially when it's just you on a solo trip, but I have done both in a solo capacity. All right, so now let us get into everything I did. So I broke up my list by all the food spots I ate and then all the excursions and activities I did. First, I'm going to read all of the food and drinks I had. Then I'm going to do the activities and excursions per day. All right, so for Tuesday, I started with Oklahoma Burgers. That's a chain in Toronto. Then I got Forget Me Not, which is a cafe, and I got the banana bread matcha. Then later on that day, I went to Bar Poet and I got the watermelon daiquiri, which was highly recommended. And then for dinner, I went to Coneo Negro. It was so good. Everything was so good, but specifically I got the shrimp and I got the collard greens. Fantastic. And then on Tuesday, all the activities and excursions I did, I went to Kensington Market, which actually was right by my Airbnb. So in terms of location, my Airbnb was a very, very good location. Then I went to the FIFA Fan Festival. There's a FIFA Fan Festival in all of the hosting cities, and New York is also one of the hosting cities. And actually, at the time of me filming this, I still haven't gone to the FIFA fan festivals here, and I hope to do that this week. But the one in Toronto was huge and it was so fun, and there were live performances and activations. It was great. Then I went to Little Italy and I just walked around Little Italy. This is where the bar was that I got my watermelon daiquiri, so I just walked around there. Then I went to Little Portugal, also walked around. I also went to the Drake Hotel. They have a photo booth in there. And one thing about me, I just love a keepsake wherever I travel. I did end up getting a magnet later, which we'll talk about, which is my number one keepsake every single time I go anywhere. But I did want to go to the photo booth. So I went over to the Drake Hotel and went to the photo booth. So that was day 1 of the trip. Day 2. For food and drinks, I went to Room Coffee, which is a chain. They have, I think, 3 or 4 locations in Toronto. I got the strawberry matcha from there. Then I went to Sleepy Pete's for a breakfast sandwich. Oh my gosh, the breakfast sandwich was incredible. Like I said, you'll see it on the YouTube vlog. It was so, so good. All right. Then I went to Baldassare for pasta lunch. One of the best pastas I've ever had in my life. They make it fresh every single day, and they only serve lunch between 12 and 2 for 4 days of the week. That's it. So you literally have to get there between those 2 hours or you will not get lunch. It was so, so good. Then I went to Cactus Club to get the peach bellinis, which apparently are the infamous drinks you get there. And they look so cute and they were honestly so good. They were essentially a frozen slushy drink. And I really wanted more than one. I only got one, but very, very good. And then dinner was at Mademoiselle, and they have a girl dinner inspired menu where you get a drink, a starter, an entree, and a dessert for $25, which is an amazing deal. The atmosphere is a very party vibe. They have a DJ at the top, and they were also playing the game, and that was really fun. All right, then for the activities and excursions I did on day 2, I went on a bike ride that morning, which was so main character and so much fun. I mentioned this on my YouTube video. When I went to Governor's Island on a work trip, I did a bike ride as well around the island. Something about doing a solo bike ride is so main character, and I had my headphones in. Don't worry, I could still hear my surroundings. I only had one headphone in at a point, but nevertheless, I had such a fun experience riding around Toronto. I went from my Airbnb all the way down to the water, and then I went across the waterfront for a while, and then I went back up. It was amazing. That was one of my favorite things I did by far. Then I went to St. Lawrence Market, which is essentially an indoor market. This reminds me a lot of Seattle because Seattle has the Pike's Place Market, but there are also so many markets around the country that I've been to that are very similar. This was a 2-level market, so many food vendors, so many decor, shopping mecca. It was really cool. Also, there was a live performance happening outside of the market, which I stopped and listened to for a little bit, and that was really nice. Then I went to the historic distillery district. This is such a gem. I really enjoyed being there as well. Cobblestones and the old vintage aesthetic buildings. It's essentially an outdoor shopping center as well, but it feels like a little community and it's huge. I walked through it and I thought it was done, and then there was a whole other section. I wish I could have actually stayed there a lot longer, but that was really fun. And they were also playing the game. They were playing the game everywhere. When I say the game, I mean FIFA, because of course it's a multi-week thing. Then I went on a city cruise. I know that it is such a touristy thing to do. And yeah, I'm a tourist because I've never been there. And I really enjoyed the cruise as well. It's an hour cruise. You go to the pier, which is where they pick you up, and we sail around for an hour and they drop us back off at the same spot. And I honestly do love learning about the history of things and where things originated. And the tour guide on the boat was very knowledgeable, and I got great pictures and videos, and that was definitely a high point of the trip as well. Then I went to the CN Tower. I went all the way up because of course I had to. This reminded me a lot of Sears Tower / Willis Tower in Chicago when I went in 2024. Gorgeous view. Definitely, I would say a fun thing to do, especially if you have never been to Toronto. I really enjoyed it. All right. And then day 3, final day of the trip, the food, drinks I had, I went to 3 Dots Matcha and I got a lavender matcha there. Then I went to Fresca Pizza. I got their famous margarita pizza. I went to Smokes Poutine and just got the classic traditional poutine. If you don't know what poutine is, it's French fries with gravy and cheese curds on top. And poutine is a staple food in Canada, if you didn't know. Then I went to Bang Bang Bakery for ice cream, and they have such unique flavors. I love ice cream. I don't have it that much, but I love ice cream. So that was a really nice sweet treat. And then the last food item I had there was swato, which is Chinese food. I got the barbecue pork lo mein. And then on our last day for our excursions and activities, I went to Casa Loma, which is a mansion, essentially right in the middle of Toronto. A mansion castle. It is a castle, but I realized on maps it did say it was a mansion. It's definitely a full-on castle. So much history there. I loved walking around. There's a tunnel underneath the castle. vintage cars in there. Great view. I really, really enjoyed that. Then I went to the Art Gallery of Toronto, and I love art museums. I've talked about that a ton. And that was a nice chiller point of the day that I really enjoyed. Then I had to go see the Toronto sign, of course, because I am a tourist and I had to go see it. So I went over there, which is in a plaza area of Toronto. Then I went to the aquarium, which sounds kind of random, but it was right next to CN Tower. So it was fun to go as well, see the aquarium. There was a specific water tank that had the most beautiful fish. It literally looked like a school of fish in Finding Nemo. That was my favorite part. I put that in one of my Instagram dumps for my Toronto trip because I loved it so much. It just made me feel like a kid again in the best way. And then last but not least, I raced over back to Lawrence Market to get a magnet because, like I said, I literally have to get a magnet everywhere I go. I've now collected magnets for the last 4 years of traveling, and I love that they're all next to each other on my fridge. And that's it, y'all. That is my Toronto recap. I had such an amazing trip. I had so much fun. Toronto is a city just like New York. And when I say just like New York, a lot of people compare it to New York, saying that it is a mini version of New York. And I can agree with that to an extent. It is a little bit of a slower pace, but it definitely is a city. And I realized that 3 days was definitely not enough. I did so much in 3 days, but there's so much more to see there. I'm happy that it's not that far, so I can of course go there whenever I want. But like I said, there's so much more world to see. Really, really cannot wait to see where I go next, whether it is this year or next year. But all in all, I just want everybody to be so inspired to take a trip solo. Taking solo trips are so different than any other form of travel because it allows you to do what you want fully and listen to your own desires and lean into your own interests. It is one of the best joys you can have in life. And with that, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Misunderstood. Remember to rate this show 5 stars on Apple and Spotify and follow wherever you're listening. Join our Geneva group chat. It is always linked in the description of every single podcast episode. Hang out with me on my other socials, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and Pinterest at NK Madani. And I will talk to you guys in my next one.